The last trip of the night always had a special flavor for me. After years as a subway conductor, the sound of the tracks and the rhythm of the train became a part of me. By that time, I knew every curve and every station like the lines on my own hands. But that night, there was something different in the air, a palpable tension that seemed to envelop the city in an oppressive fog. The subway was almost empty, as if the darkness itself had swallowed the passengers. The few who were still on board wore distant, restless expressions, as if they carried secrets they couldn't share. A woman with sunken eyes stared out the window, while a man, with his head bowed, seemed to wrestle with dark thoughts. The atmosphere weighed heavily, and the flickering fluorescent lights intensified the discomfort that lingered in the car. When I reached the station, an inexplicable delay took hold of my watch. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick, as if something was about to happen. I checked the panel, but everything seemed normal. Something wasn't right. The city outside looked like a nightmare scene, and the idea of being alone in an almost empty train began to send shivers down my spine. I had no idea what awaited me at the next stops, but a sinister intuition told me that the darkness was not just an absence of light, it was a presence lurking in the shadows. With most of the passengers disembarking, the train now felt like an empty shell, resonating only with the distant echo of my thoughts. But there was something in the air, a sense that I wasn't truly alone. The silence was thick, and suddenly, the sounds began. At first, they were just whispers, soft and indistinct, as if someone were quietly conversing in a dark corner of the car. At first, I thought it might be my imagination playing tricks. But as the train continued its route, the voices grew clearer, almost as if they were drawing closer. Irregular thuds echoed against the walls of the car, a series of taps that couldn't be explained. I looked around, trying to find the source, but the train remained empty, save for me. Fear began to seep into me, growing with each stop. The lights flickered erratically, and the whispers intensified, transforming into frantic murmurs that seemed to surround me. It was as if something was watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. My instincts screamed for me to pull the brake and escape, but a part of me wanted to understand what was happening. And so, I kept driving, each stop becoming a test of my sanity. Curiosity and fear intertwined within me as the whispers grew increasingly insistent. I decided I needed to investigate, even knowing that logic no longer made sense in that place. I descended into one of the seemingly empty cars, my heart racing. The darkness inside seemed to swallow the light, and the atmosphere was thick with unbearable tension. That's when I saw him. A man sat still, with a strange smile on his lips, as if he were in a trance. His empty eyes fixed on me, and a wave of revulsion washed over my body. I approached hesitantly and asked what he was doing there. He simply stared at me, unblinking, and replied in a monotone, "I'm here to fetch you." A wave of panic overtook me. Before I could process his words, something inside me screamed to flee. I pressed the emergency button and felt a brutal adrenaline rush through my body as I ran out of the car. The sound of the train echoed in my mind, and the figure of the man remained etched in my memory, like a nightmare that refused to fade. When I finally reached the next station, my legs were trembling, and I was on the verge of exhaustion. The officer there looked at me with concern. I told him about the man, the whispers, and the sinister presence. But when I looked back, the car was empty. The man had vanished as if he had never existed. The darkness of the subway felt deeper now, as if it knew I had only scratched the surface of a terrifying mystery. And as the officer spoke, I realized that the city never truly slept, it merely waited patiently for more souls to be swallowed.
I am responsible for the maintenance of the oldest subway station on the line, a place that few dare to visit at night. The smell of mold mixes with the cold metal, and the dim lighting casts shadows that dance on the peeling walls. The passengers who still venture down here seem to hurry, as if an invisible force is pushing them away. Stories of disappearances and urban legends whispered among the few who know the place linger in the air, but I, naturally skeptical, have always ignored these superstitions. As I inspect the tracks, the silence is broken by distant noises, echoes reverberating through the tunnels as if someone is watching me. A crack, a whisper, something that shouldn't be there. The feeling that I am not alone begins to settle in, but I force myself to push those thoughts away. After all, they are just stories. Yet, a growing unease makes me quicken my pace. With each step, the feeling of being watched intensifies, as if something or someone is following me in the shadows. The subtle movement at the edges of the light seems to manifest, and for a moment, I feel my heart race. The air, once cold and dry, now carries an oppressive weight, an unsettling presence that I cannot ignore. As I inspect one of the platforms, a metallic glint catches my attention. Approaching it, I discover a worn leather bag and a broken watch, both visibly out of place. A knot forms in my throat. Who could have left this here? A sense of despair begins to settle in. I was so focused that I hadn't realized how far I truly was from safety. The noises grow louder, now transforming into distorted echoes of laughter and whispered voices that snake through the corridors, as if the walls are enjoying themselves at my expense. The laughter is raw, almost childish, but resonates with a malice that makes me want to run. Doubt about my sanity tightens like a noose. I feel that the station is alive, and something is watching, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. A chilling cold runs down my spine when suddenly, a distorted shape appears before me, casting a shadow that contorts in an unnatural way. It's as if the station itself has materialized, revealing its true face, an entity that feeds on fear and despair. Laughter echoes throughout the place, a sound that pierces my mind and chills my blood. Without thinking, I turn and start to run. But the tracks transform into an endless labyrinth. The lights flicker, and every corridor seems to close in around me, creating a prison I cannot comprehend. The sensation of being pulled back, as if the station is feeding on my panic, consumes me. Looking back, the grotesque presence draws closer, and I realize there is no escape. The station, now alive, seems to devour the light, swallowing any hope I had of getting away. With one last scream, I plunge into the shadows and everything goes dark. When silence finally settles in, the only certainty is that my story has now become part of the legends whispered among the few who still dare to venture here. The station waits, patiently, for its next visitor.
The night was cold and silent, a shroud of solitude enveloping every corner of the subway station. The echo of my footsteps resonated, as if the darkness were laughing at me. The fluorescent light flickered, creating dancing shadows at the edges of the platform. They were just indistinct figures, but the feeling that they were watching me was undeniable. Every time the lights dimmed, one of them seemed to draw closer, though it remained distant, as if trying to lure me into the unknown. I tried to ignore it, quickening my pace, but the sounds echoed. Footsteps that were not mine blended with the distant noise of the train, heightening the tension. The air was heavy, charged with something I couldn't identify, but that made my skin crawl. The solitude of the station became palpable, and at that moment, I knew I was not as alone as I thought. An invisible presence lingered, a promise that the night still held secrets I was not prepared to confront. The train arrived, its doors opening with a metallic noise that echoed like a lament. I stepped inside, and the claustrophobic atmosphere enveloped me immediately. The interior was deserted, except for the conductor, who watched me with a disturbing gaze. There was something in his face, a warning I couldn't decipher. He seemed to want to tell me something, but the words didn't leave his lips. A chill ran down my spine. As the doors closed, I noticed that the train began to move without stopping at the usual stations. With each passing moment, the tension grew. The interior lights flickered, and shadows began to twist in the windows, transforming into grotesque figures. What were once mere silhouettes now took on distorted forms, familiar faces becoming masks of terror. The space became increasingly oppressive, and the feeling of being watched intensified. The figures seemed to draw closer, almost touching the glass, their piercing gazes paralyzing me. The line between reality and hallucination blurred, and I wondered if what I was seeing was a product of my mind or if there was indeed something out there, waiting to drag me into the darkness. The train continued its dark journey, each jolt intensifying the feeling that I was descending into an endless abyss. The figures were no longer just shadows, but tangible manifestations of my own fears. They materialized before me, familiar faces I had tried to forget, lost friends, distant relatives, each wearing expressions of pain and despair. The pressure in my chest grew as suffocating memories unfurled in my mind. They were the mistakes I had made, the promises unkept. I was surrounded by these specters, whispering truths I refused to confront. The line between what was real and what was a product of my imagination dissolved, and I found myself trapped in a never-ending nightmare. At the height of my terror, a choice presented itself: confront these figures or succumb to despair. The train stopped abruptly, and the door opened to an even deeper darkness. I knew that stepping out meant facing my ghosts, but staying meant being consumed by them. With one last look at the conductor, whose eyes seemed to plead for my courage, I made my choice. Whatever awaited outside, I would have to face, because the only way to escape terror is to confront it.